Okay, so we defined it, charging different prices, yes. Okay, so we talked about charging prices to different people last time. Price discrimination. That awful word, discrimination, but it turns out to be a pretty profitable thing to do for our business. And that's why you guys see it so often out in the real world. Ooh, I want to get you guys, I suppose you'd like it if I just leave it off, but shut off all electronic devices, please.
Using your electronic device, right?
And there's some potential advantages for society of having some price discrimination that we talked about last time. So we're going to get into a little bit more detail on it today and think about how you can successfully be a price discriminator, kind of the guts of it. So what I want to look at first is the monopoly model that you should come to love and learn for this chapter. And we've got a downward sloping demand curve. We have a marginal revenue curve for a single price monopolist, looks like this. And we can have that dip negative, remember, that marginal revenue can lie below. So the marginal revenue curve is twice as steep as the demand curve and lies below it. And the monopolist, being a profit maximizer, is going to set or produce a quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit produced equal the cost of the last unit. And so if we've got some marginal cost curve that looks like this, they're going to produce that quantity, and then they're going to charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay for that quantity. So we go up to the demand curve because it conveys that information. Hang a left and read off that number. That's the price that the monopolist is going to charge for their product. All right. Our monopoly model in both the short run and the long run looks something like this. You can just draw an average total cost curve. Anywhere through here is fine. So, as we did in Chapter 11, if the monopolist found that 100 units was the profit maximizing number of units to produce, the average cost per unit of making that many, we go up to the average total cost curve, hang a left, and that number right there represents the average cost per unit. And that leaves us a nice little chunk of profit, right? So this red box represents the economic profit because its dimensions are the average profit per unit times the number of units we're making. So that's how many bucks we're rolling in. This represents our economic profit because it shows the difference between the price and the average cost per unit. So it's kind of the profit per unit on average times the number of units we're making, which is 100. So the dimensions of that rectangle represents economic profit. Yeah, that's all kind of a review from last time so far.
I appreciate it.
Questions on that? Now, what does this little area represent? This little triangular area.
Consumer surplus.
Good. Consumer surplus, right? So if we look at all the units that the monopolist produces, some people are getting some value even above the monopoly price. So even though that monopolist is perceived to be charging those high prices, well, some people are willing to pay even more than this price. So let's just say the price was $25. Somebody out there is willing to pay $30. Somebody's willing to pay $45, right? So there's still consumer surplus alive and well represented by that little green triangle region. All right, so the producer surplus would be the area above the marginal cost curve and up to, so it includes this profit box, but it also is actually a little bit bigger. It includes this part too. Remember when we did producer surplus and I told you that producer surplus and profits weren't the same thing because profits take into consideration the fixed costs as well. And so they were similar but not quite the same concept. So that would be the producer surplus. And this little triangular region was what?
Deadweight loss.
Deadweight loss. All right, so now we got kind of the welfare pieces. I just wanted to rehash that. Producers, consumers, the government isn't involved here, by the way, at this point, so no government revenue. But there is this deadweight loss, and what defines the deadweight loss is that somebody out there would benefit more than what it would cost for this unit that's not being produced. So it would be good for society if we could get somebody to get those units produced. All right, so price discrimination. If the monopolist is able to figure out who these people are in a legal way that are willing to pay $30 or $32 or $35 and separate them out, then that would be a good thing to do. Check out what happens. Let's say the first 50 units, and I'm just kind of saying this hypothetically, the first 50 people out there, if we could figure out who they are, maybe they're non-students. Students are only willing to pay 25 bucks, but non-students, they got more income, they got a real job and so forth. They're willing to pay a little bit more. And so maybe the non-students out there are actually willing to pay 30 or even more. And so what does this do to the bottom line for the company? Well, now all of a sudden, this little area that used to be the consumer surplus is now going to go to the company, right? They're going to charge $30 to those non-students and kind of capture part of their consumer surplus. And by the way, it's kind of not the same as stealing from consumers because at the end of the day, the consumer was willing to pay that price anyway. So they don't even know any better, right? So when we see these price discrimination schemes, when you go to the movie theater, and I don't know, I'm not sure if the local Ottawa theater does this or not, but we've seen it around town, and they offer a student discount, right? We don't even think twice. So students are paying, oh, that seems fair, and so we just have students and non-students paying different prices. But this is what's going, this is the economics behind that. It ends up being a profitable thing to do because, of course, these 50 units didn't cost any more than the other 50 units, right, on average. And so all of that becomes added on to the extra profits. So that's kind of the key thing, key result that's going on with price discrimination. So with price discrimination, the monopolist increases profits by capturing, somehow capture sounds better than stealing, because we're not really stealing something that they didn't have in the first place potentially, but by capturing some consumer surplus. And that's what's shown here graphically. So this is the extra little box. All right. So there's 3 key ingredients. 3 keys to successful price discrimination. All right, number 1, you need to be able to separate out consumers legally. So unless you want to find yourself in jail, avoid protected classes. Race, religion, gender, that sort of stuff, right? So figure out how to separate out consumers legally. Number two, the consumers have to have differing demands, and you have to have some market power. So we have to be in a situation where the firm faces a downward sloping demand curve. I want to leave this a little loose because you don't have to be a monopoly to engage in price discrimination. The next chapter we're going to talk about can do it too. So anytime you face a downward sloping demand curve, you're okay to possibly do this. So you must have market power. Must have market power. And that means face downward sloping demand that is different in each group. So let's put in parentheses here. The groups need different elasticities of demand, different slopes to their demand curve. All right, the last key, these are the three keys to successful price discrimination. It's got to be difficult to resell the product. So resale is impossible or difficult. Resale of the product is impossible or difficult. Why would that be important? Think about our story here of students and non-students maybe. Why would you need resale to be difficult? Okay, we all of a sudden create kind of a profit opportunity for the low-cost people, right? If they can resell it. So now you're getting the student discount. Imagine if we did this at the at the grocery store, or maybe the liquor store. You know, I can imagine a story of a liquor store offering a student discount. Of course, you got to be 21. But then students get this little idea. Well, hey, they offer a 20% discount for students. I could buy the beer and resell it myself and make a little bit of cut. Better yet, I'll just sit in the parking lot. And so, you know, I'm going about my business, going in the liquor store. All of a sudden, I hear psst, psst, psst. I'm like, what? What do you need? Hey, what are you doing? I'm going in there to buy a case of beer. He's like, really? Well, how would you like a 10% discount? I'm like, I'm an economist. I'd love a 10% discount. What do you got? He's like, well, just give me the money and I'll go inside and buy it. And I get a 20% discount, but we might as well share in it. So he walks in, gets the 20% discount, right? Sells it to me, I get a 10% discount. The only person who loses is the liquor store because they did not successfully separate out the markets. So it kind of backfired on them. And so now they're selling all their product at the lower price rather than capturing the higher price that they were expecting to. So that's the resale part. So if we think about the types of things, we did this last time when we wrapped up, the types of things that have student discounts, movie theater, able to resell that easily? No. Haircuts, easy to resell that? No. So any sort of service-oriented product makes great potential for a price discrimination scheme. Anything that's a physical product makes it much more difficult. All right, so you'll see that a lot more with with services as opposed to products. All right, questions or comments there? All right. So the last thing we're going to look at in this chapter is a natural monopoly. A natural monopoly exists when it just seems to make sense from a cost standpoint to have one firm producing it rather than a bunch of firms. A natural monopoly. So I'm going to motivate this one jumping right into a picture. So natural monopoly. So draw yourself a big graph. And imagine that we've got, an industry where we've got 4 firms in it. So I'm going to draw just one average cost curve just to kind of help motivate this thing. So let's say that this is one average cost curve. And there are 4 firms, and they are producing, let's say, electricity. This might be kind of an absurd example, but some sort of power of some sort. All right, so there's, 400 gigawatts of power being generated by 4 firms. So that's what we're going to start off with. So example, we've got 4 firms. So this is the representative firm, by the way. 4 firms making a quantity of 400 each. Maybe I should do let's do little q for that one. So each firm is producing 400. So the market, big Q, is how much? 1,600, yes. Let's engage those math brains here a little bit. So 1,600 is big Q. All right, now, if this industry is characterized with economies of scale, what might it be tempting to see? What might happen in this industry? So you've got 4 firms, each producing about 400. The market demand, the equilibrium is such that there's 1,600 worth of demand. If this industry is characterized with economies of scale, what might be a tempting thing to do for one of these firms to do? Buy a different company, right? What's economies of scale? This should be the flip. Economies of scale, good thing to know. Let me hear it from that second half of the room. Somebody find economies of scale. First person to raise their hand with the answer gets an extra credit point. All right, go for it. Oh gosh, you guys always throw me. Katie and Casey, you're Katie.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Situation where increasing the scale of production leads to a decrease in long-run average.
Good. All right, a situation where increasing the scale of production leads to a decrease in long-run average costs. So if I can increase the scale of production, I can drive costs down. So one way to increase the scale of production pretty fast here is to buy another company or merge with another company. So now we've got a merger going on between 2 firms, and so one firm is producing 800 units at now a cost of something less. So this is maybe our medium-sized company. This was 4 smaller-sized companies. One firm is producing power at $30 a gigawatt hour. The other remaining firms are still at $40 a gigawatt hour. Who's got a competitive advantage to possibly cut price? The bigger firm, right? And so now they could say, hey, we can offer it for 35. Let's take these guys out. Well, if there's two firms here, what are they going to be forced to do? Merge, right? So now they're forced to merge. And so now we've got two firms operating at 800 each to meet the demand of 1,600 for the community. Since there's two firms, that's kind of nice. We've got power possibly coming down in price to $30 a gigawatt hour. All right, well, again, if there's more economies of scale, then what might be awfully tempting to do is to say, hey guys, why don't we just merge again, and we can have a really large firm, we can create a little monopoly and get power down to $20 a gigawatt hour. And again, that sounds good, but what's going on now at this level, meeting the demand with 1,600 units in this fashion, that is different than what was going on before. They can charge it. There's no competition. They can charge anything they want. We're right back to the monopoly problem, right? So we've allowed power to be concentrated down to one firm. Yes, they are producing at a low cost, but now they can raise the price, and we're back to this monopoly situation. So that's not so hot. All right, so the picture that we drew last time, we can think about the long-run average cost curve for the industry looking something like this. Long-run average costs are going down. So that creates potentially a natural monopoly. So, to define that conceptually here, a situation where it is natural for the free market to gravitate towards one firm. That's kind of the natural part of it. The somewhat unnatural part of it might be that, oh, well, the government says, well, geez, if you're big enough, you can drive costs down to here, maybe we should just run this. So in some other countries outside of the United States, the government runs the power plant. It's completely ran by the central planner. In the United States, what we've done is we've regulated heavily the one firm that provides it. So we went over that utilities were an example of monopoly, and so we're going to kind of authorize the one firm to do it, but we're going to watch so that you're not abusing us too much. So that's our next step to this, is to think about the monitoring of it. Let me pause there. Anybody have any questions so far? All right, so let's redraw that and think about some of the consequences of regulation. So this time now, I just want to draw an average cost curve that looks like this. Long run. Not being long run average cost. And if we have a long run average cost curve that looks like this, if we make our traditional bowl shaped, that means that there's a marginal cost that lies below it, and it's getting kind of close to it, but it's never reached the minimum point because it's never bottomed out, right? So it's getting close somewhere over here at some obnoxious level of output, then we'd have that going on. So just kind of draw another line that's approaching it. And then draw a demand curve in. So let's just draw a demand curve that looks like that. I'm going to go off the paper, but you're free to go all the way up. a marginal revenue curve that's twice as steep that lies below it, so you can kind of do your little trick here, the midpoint exercise, and maybe draw a marginal revenue curve. Sometimes we stop here with monopoly. We don't draw that going below the horizontal axis because it turns out it wouldn't be really too feasible for the monopolist to be there anyway. Even though the cost curves are a little bit strange, the logic's still the same. How does a firm maximize profits? By producing the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit is equal to the cost of the last unit. So the monopolist is still going to produce there. They're going to charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay for the good, which is up here. Same story we told before. But what I want you to think about now is how do we impose regulation? Right? How do we impose regulation? So right now, if we leave the monopoly alone, it earns these monopoly profits, right, equal to this rectangular region here. Price greater than average cost with that. So, I don't ask you to do this very often, but you put on your government cap. What's best for society? Not best for you as a consumer necessarily, but what's best for society? That's what policymakers should be doing if they're not looking out more for themselves than they are the general public, which is a different topic we'll talk about later. Okay? What do you think? Where's a good place to be?
Somewhere between the long-range average cost curve and the marginal cost curve.
Somewhere in between here. How about in terms of quantity? We talked about allocative efficiency. Where's that? That might be a good place to look. Where's that on this graph? Marginal cost equals marginal benefit. I don't see a marginal benefit curve up there. It's the demand curve. So the demand curve is the marginal benefit curve. And so the allocatively efficient quantity would be right there. So one thought would be to have the government force the company to produce this quantity, right? But there's a problem with that quantity.
The average costs are higher.
The average costs are higher than what people are willing to pay for that quantity, so the firm would be earning a negative profit. Can the government force companies to earn a loss? No. God bless America. Right? We're not to that point where the government can force a company to stay in business and lose money. You just have to do that. Now they do it maybe backdoor through other things. We can, through taxation, we can actually force payment. But in our thought of how we think the world should work, with businesses being able to voluntarily provide things, businesses aren't going to do that. They're not going to produce this amount. All right, so this just won't work. So that's our first note here. So note, forcing, let me write this out a little more carefully. The government forcing QAE won't work. Because the firm has a loss at QAE. The average cost of production is higher than the price people would be paying at QAE. So, back to the drawing board. What would be another option?
Demand equals long run.
Okay, demand equals long run average cost, all right? So, what's going on at that point?
They're making an economic profit in
Good, they're making an economic profit of 0, but does that mean they're earning 0 profit? No, they're earning a normal profit. So when economic profit's 0, it's okay. They're still earning a normal profit. And so let's call this QR for regulation, the regulated quantity, government regulated. Maybe we could call it QG. But let's call it, maybe we'll call it, well, whatever. You guys call it what you want. But that's the government regulated quantity. And at this quantity, we go up to the demand curve to learn the price. We go up to the average cost curve to learn the average cost. And price equals average total cost. So we have kind of a zero profit criteria. So the government goes about monitoring the businesses to make sure they're not earning an abnormal profit. So we tend to call this a second best solution. The best solution, if we were to somehow able to do it, would be the allocatively efficient quantity. But we can't quite get there, so maybe this one is better than this one, so we're at least a little closer.
So economy government regulated, there's normal profit, and then you said something else.
Yes, let me, I was going to write some of this out anyway, so let me just do it and we'll see if we get it out. So note number 2, QR is where the firm has economic profit equal to 0, just a normal profit. So they're kind of breaking even. It's maybe what we went back to calling it fair. So QR is the government regulated quantity. So now the regulation is not to produce QR, but rather to have zero profit. So the regulation is really a zero profit policy. So the regulation is zero economic profit. Now that's important as we now start to think about the behavior of the firm under this type of regulation. Does anybody have any other questions before we jump into that? So here I am running this company. I'm the business owner. And I need a new car, a new company car. Do I buy the Cadillac or do I buy the Chevy Cavalier?
The Cadillac.
I need a new desk. Do I buy the nice solid wood oak desk or do I buy the particle board desk from Walmart?
Solid
Oak. When I go to buy paper, do I buy the nice thick quality paper or the cheap little thin stuff that you get at Office Max?
It all depends on what you need all of this for.
Okay. Why might I like the upper end stuff?
Because it's cool.
Well, it makes you look better.
Because it's awesome, because it's cool, because why?
Right? You're not buying it.
You're not buying it, your costs go up, right? But what's the difference here? So normally when we're under a free market situation, if costs go up, what happens to profits? They go down, right? So we have incentive to minimize on costs and maximize revenues, right? We're there to maximize profit. We've changed the game though, right? The government's watching us now, and the condition is that profits need to be 0. So what are my incentives now? Well, I need a car, I need a desk, I need some paper to run my business. We've missed that incentive to kind of economize, if you will, or minimize our expenditures on our business. And possibly when it comes to pay raises for my employees. Oh, they asked me for a raise. I thought that was a good idea. So I put them up gave them a 20% raise. Okay? So what happens? So if this is the condition, the monopolist is able to keep raising price to match their costs. Of course, they show the government their costs, but does the government crawl in there and make sure that it's not too nice of a desk or not too nice a paper or not too nice of pens or not too much pay for their employees? right? It becomes difficult. And so as they start to do what we expect them to do in econ class, which is to do what's best for themselves, all they're doing now is burying that into the cost. The costs start to rise. As the cost starts to rise, what happens to QR? Decreases. So QR starts to drift away from what we thought we were going, and they're going right back here. In fact, if they're successful at raising costs enough, burying all trips to the Bahamas and all that kind of stuff, what if they rose their cost up to LRAC 1? Look at our result. We're right back to where we were anyway with a free market. So incentives matter. That's one thing I want you to come away from this class is what are the incentives in place? Sometimes government policy or other policies for that matter can be policies that the CEO dreamt up or the president of the university dreamt up. Sometimes policies sound good, but after you start to think about them critically, which is what economists do, there might be unintended consequences to that type of policy, and that might steer us away from the result that we desired in the first place, and that causes us to drift backwards.
So, the motivation to reduce cost / price is lost, and because they can meet normal profit criteria through.
Yep, I was going to recap that anyway. Let me give a stab at it so that everybody gets it down. So, here's the problem that we see in monopolies in this situation. The firm does not have incentive to minimize costs. And the reason is they're just able to raise price, because costs are always going up. Boy, healthcare is subject to this type of stuff, right? Well, Medicare, Medicaid, government, you can see that our costs are going up. Well, there's not control measures that we might otherwise see in a free market to keep some prices anyway better under control. So we're able to raise price to meet the quote-unquote higher costs. So just to kind of motivate that, we get the caddy versus the cavalier. We've got the oak versus the particle board. Desk, oak desk versus particle board. Just to kind of put those to kind of trigger your memory as you're reviewing the notes later. All right, and so the last thing I'll add on to this is that an increase in cost, an increase in long-run average cost leads to a decrease in QR, heading back to QM, the monopoly quantity anyway. And so if the monopolist is able to make maneuvers such that their behavior really isn't changed, then what good is the policy done? It could potentially unravel the whole policy. Maybe not. Maybe it'll stop short somewhere and we're still a little bit better off. Or worse yet, they're able to manipulate the system in such a way that we drift past what they would do. Right? That's another possibility. Okay. That summarized things. Good? Any other last comments, questions?
Does the government have, do they have ways that they stop firms from raising their costs like that?
Well, yeah, that's a good thing that leads us into the abyss. Kind of leads us into the 27,000 pages of Obamacare type of thing. So what you find as you start to look at different policies, the market will respond. The market always seems to win is what I've learned until it maybe gravitates to where the system's upside down and we have all-out communism. But what happens is there's a rule made to plug that hole. And then once that's corrected, then savvy, clever entrepreneurs and business people find another way, or sometimes technology changes, and it allows another opening. And they're always just looking to maximize profits. It's what we expect them to do. And then like, oh, that didn't work. Remember we changed that policy back 2 years ago. Let's add some more language to stop that one. And then we find another loophole. And before you know it, the IRS tax code is this thick. And it's so complicated that the average human being can't even come close to comprehending it. And even some of the most advanced CPAs have trouble getting all the information in one spot. I had that happen to me with, I have a fairly complicated return in the past. It's becoming more simpler now that I'm back full time and have sold some of my properties and entities off. But I asked my accountant, you know, well, what if we did this thing? What would be the impact on, what would be the tax effect? He's a high-level CPA, tax specialist. He just said, I don't know. I'd have to run all these numbers through his computer program to kind of double check what the effect is. And it was a fairly simple thing. You know, conceptually it was like, well, what if we did this instead of this? I don't know. I'd have to spend an hour, you know, sorting through 50,000 other details to get the answer back from the computer program. And this is using computer. This isn't pen and paper, but that's how complicated it is. It all is just built on previous kind of piecemeal policy that keeps kind of building and building on until it becomes such a bird's nest that you're about ready to throw it right in the garbage can. Which I'm hoping that will be the case. I guess I'm getting on a little bit of a sidebar, but there is, those of you who had me for macro, remember we talked about the fair tax, which was to eliminate the income tax and go to a consumption tax. Just keep it the same amount of money. We're not having any fights about Democrat, Republican thing about what we should spend money on. Let's take the exact same amount of money that we're collecting through income tax, and let's just have a sales tax at the cash register when you buy stuff. And we'll collect the same amount of money at the cash register that we did through the income tax, take that big IRS tax code and dump it right in the trash, and just start fresh with what we call a consumption tax. A lot of wisdom to that. A lot of things that are, I think, pretty sound in my opinion. So that's a whole other side topic. You guys got me all excited here talking about that. Anything else? Okay. We're going to do a test after we get through the next material, before we get to game theory on this last chapter. So I kind of want to get you thinking. We're going to do an in-class test again. And we'll probably do it the week of November 2nd. I know, it seems to be never a good day for anybody, right? But the week of November 2nd, and we'll do it on a Wednesday. So it'll be actually the 6th. No, 3, 4. The 4th?
The 6th. The 6th is the Wednesday.
Oh, the 6th is the Wednesday. Okay, November 6th. And it'll kind of cover all of this firm stuff that we've got into so far before we get into the game theory stuff. So, fun times ahead, I tell you. All right, so before we do that, we got our next. How can you cry? That's a long ways off.
I performed that whole weekend.
All right. Well,
So yeah.
monopolistic competition. This one's going to be fairly easy, I think, for you, honestly. This chapter is really kind of an extension, even the way it looks and feels is very similar to the monopoly model, even though it's closer to perfect competition. So the things I want to do, first of all, is think about those characteristics again. So 1, 2, and 3, there's going to be a large number of sellers. And I'm going to jump to 3. There's going to be free entry and exit. So far, what does it look more like? Perfect competition or monopoly? Perfect competition. What goes in this slot for perfect competition? Homogeneous good, right? So if it's the farmer whose one farmer's corn is identical to the other. Now we're going to put stuff like fast food hamburgers in there. And so we're going to have a differentiated or heterogeneous product, but a differentiated product. So the products aren't different, they're differentiated, right? So that's important. So these are similar substitutable, that's a word, substitutable goods. So how do companies differentiate themselves? So you guys can start to think of all the goods on the shelves at Walmart. I already mentioned fast food hamburgers. So what are some ways to differentiate their product? Ways to differentiate. Let's do a little brainstorm session here. Give me one.
It tastes better.
Price. I'm sorry, what?
It tastes better for like.
It tastes better. So some sort of taste, maybe seasoning,
I don't know.
right? If we're talking about
Fast food, I guess.
hamburger or something, so maybe we can change the taste of it a little bit. Okay, what else?
Packaging.
Packaging. Good. So we might have, boy, back in the good old days, burgers used to stay real warm when we would tuck them in environmentally damaging styrofoam. That was, oh boy, those hamburgers would stay nice and warm then. Of course, we still use styrofoam when you get your to-go boxes, right? But McDonald's would use the styrofoam containers. So packaging. Once one company started using paper-type packaging to help save the environment, and consumers appreciated that and started flocking to their little corner, then the other company said, oh, I better do that too, right? And so competition kind of forced both those companies to start maybe mimicking each other with packaging. Okay, what else?
Yeah, what about like.
I heard people say price. Now, price is kind of a tough one because the price will kind of generally follow some of the other costs that you've done with it that might enhance it. So if you put on some expensive seasoning and it tastes a lot better, you might be able to raise the price. So price is kind of our ultimate equalizer that ends up getting adjusted because of that. If the two goods, what I want to focus in on is the things that make that price different, that kind of really set it apart. Okay, what else did I hear somebody say?
Brand name.
Brand name, good. So kind of a catchy name is certainly a way to differentiate yourself. What else?
Advertising.
Advertising, certainly. Do we hire Britney Spears, or do we get, give me a hot pop artist right now.
Selena Gomez.
Selena Gomez. Do we get Selena Gomez, or do we get Britney Spears? Are we on the low budget advertising or the high budget advertising? All right, we will pick it up from there. Have a good weekend.
Yeah.